Buridan's ass dilemma. Buridan's ass refers to a medieval paradox concerning the logic of rationality and free will. It demonstrates the tension between formal and informal ways of thinking and the sometimes paradoxical consequence when this tension is ignored. It refers to a hypothetical situation wherein an ass that is equally hungry and thirsty is placed precisely midway between a stack of hay and a pail of water. Since the paradox assumes that the ass will always go to whichever is closer, it will die of both hunger and thirst, since it cannot make any rational decision to choose one over the other. The paradox is named after the 14th-century French philosopher Jean Buridan, whose philosophy of moral determinism it satirizes. An ambiguous character. In the Middle Ages, the name of scholastic Doctor Jean Buridan became forever famous through association with a thought experiment that depicts a dog faced with a cruel dilemma: how to choose between two equally attractive options. Confronted with a pail of oats and a bucket of water, he doesn't know with which to begin, so it seems must perish of hunger and thirst. It is an example of an absurd dilemma that posterity will call burdens as a paradoxical injunction or a double constraint, but the fulfillment of either one of the constraints indeed implies the neglect of the other. Curiously, Burdens himself never used the example of the donkey, the original example of a man equally placed between food and water is from Aristotle. It is this that the Burden discusses, using at various points the example of a traveler who must choose between a choice of two routes and the case of a dog offered two equally tempting portions of food. It was rather critics of Burdon who intended to ridicule his position in the long-running debate over free will and determinism who created the famous donkey. Over the period of Renaissance, the donkey figures multiply and become evidence of an ambiguous symbolism, yet, as it happens, our donkey hasn't always had the reputation of narrow-mindedness and stupidity that certain idiomatic expressions lend him today. Stubborn as a mule, stupid as an ass, donkey job and to taw the hind legs of donkey. Far from it, in antiquity comparing a man to an ass was rather flattering. Burdon's principle. The situation of Burdon's ass was given a mathematical basis in 1984. Paper by American computer scientist Leslie Lampert, in which Lampert presents an argument that, given certain assumptions about continuity in a simple mathematical model of abundance as problem, there will always be some starting conditions under which the ass will starve to death, no matter what strategy it takes. Lamport calls this result Buridan's principle, a discrete decision based upon an input having a continuous range of values cannot be made within a bounded length of time. Discussion. Some proponents of hard determinism have granted the unpleasantness of the scenario, but have denied that it illustrates a true paradox, since one does not contradict oneself in suggesting that a man might die between two equally plausible routes of action. For example, battle Spinoza, in his Ethics, suggests that a person who sees two options as truly equally compelling cannot be fully rational. It may be objected, if man does not act from free will, what will happen if the incentives to action are equally balanced, as in the case of Buridan's ass? In reply, I am quite ready to admit that a man placed in the equilibrium described, namely as perceiving nothing but hunger and thirst, a certain food and a certain drink, each equally distant from him, would die of hunger and thirst. If I'm asked whether such a one should not rather be considered an ass than a man, I answer that I don't know, neither do I know how a man should be considered who hangs himself, or how we should consider children, fools, madmen, and etc. Of course, there are situations where we have difficulties in making up our minds. We sometimes have those difficulties, but not donkeys. This is often the case when much depends on our decision, but in the end, we'll decide one way or the other, even if only because the lapse of time changed the situation. Burdens us stops because his imagination is timeless, as somehow removed from the passage of time. He's frozen in a situation where there is only him and the two piles of hay. Yet, since donkeys lived in time, no donkey will ever start because he lacks free will.